moment. And we start right at the beginning. The story, like many other isekai, begins in a popular online role-playing game called Yggdrasil Online, a dive MMORPG to be precise. Though its popularity at the start of Overlord has already greatly been diminished, and the servers are about to be shut down. And the player Momonga, guildmaster of the powerful PvP-focused guild of Ainz Ooal Gown, and the only remaining member among the 41 original members, decided to spend the final moments in the game, until everything ends at midnight. However, instead of being locked out, he apparently remained in the game. But then, he quickly realized that he is no longer in a game, but in a new, fantastic fantasy world as his in-game avatar, an undead overlord, which is now his new reality. And after a brief panic episode, he also realized that the NPCs that he and his friends have created are now sentient beings. Momonga, now adopting the name Ainz Ooal Gown in hopes of making his guild name known, and therefore finding his lost friends, the other 40 players, starts by trying to understand the new situation and begins exploring the world outside of Nazarick, unintentionally expanding his influence. And Ainz encounters the village of Karn in the Riestile's kingdom and saves it from an attack, apparently conducted by the knights from the neighboring Baharut Empire. And he meets Gazef Stronoff, a powerful warrior of the kingdom, and learns about the conflict between the two powers. Later he defeats one of the 6 scriptures of Slain, the theocracy and the most powerful human state, the so-called Sunlight Scripture, and takes the survivors captive. And they are currently having their human fur turned into scrolls, and no, that is not an exaggeration. Also, due to a misunderstanding, Demiurge misinterpreted something Ainz said about the shiny new world he now was in, and therefore he, Albedo, and the other guardians of Nazarick, the Floor Guardians, started to making plans for world domination, believing that this is Ainz Ooal Gown's innermost wish. And it's one of those typical anime misunderstandings, but with far-reaching consequences. Then the story continues with the infiltration of Irantel, a border fortress city of the Kingdom of Riestiles. Here, Ainz adopts the alias Momon and appears as a black-armored adventurer to gather information and expand his fame and influence in the human world, building a good reputation as his alter ego. Once he was liked and popular enough, he initially wanted to reveal that he was undead and assure people that they didn't need to fear him, since he was the hero after all. Later, he meets a group of adventurers called the Swords of Darkness, and goes with them to Karn village, where he adopts Hamuske as a pet. However, back in the city, Ainz finds that the Swords of Darkness have disappeared, with some even turning undead by Clementine, a dangerous and deranged member of a death cult known as Zurnon. And Ainz defeats Clementine and another cult member, the human necromancer Khajiit, thus strengthening his reputation as Momon, and ensures that Lizzie and Enfiria Baliar, the 2 potion makers of Irantel, relocate to Karn, which allies himself with Momon, although indirectly at first. Afterwards, Entuma, one of the 7 Pleiades battlemates, informs Ainz that Shelty has supposedly betrayed Nazarick, but she was put under mind control by a world item, by Downfall of Castle and Country, after encountering the Black Scripture, Slane's elite unit and strongest among the 6 scriptures, during a mission. But Ainz suspected enemy players were behind it. Unable to bring himself to send the other guardians to fight Sheltir, who is the most powerful among them, Ainz, seeing his NPCs as the last remnants of his friends, had to fight her himself in a spectacular battle against a far superior opponent. But he ultimately wins through excellent strategy and Aura's secret intervention. Ainz then turns his attention to the Lizard Man, whom Aura, another one of Nazarick's floor guardians, finds near the guild base. And Ainz decides to use their bodies for magical experiments to create an undead legion. But after the Lizard Man, in a desperate last alliance, managed to defeat a test army from Nazarick and eliminate their leader, a former rival adventurer, Igvark, Ainz decided to take further action. Ainz first demonstrated the full power of Nazarick, mobilizing not only the old guard of the tomb, but also all of the floor guardians, hoping to lure out the suspected players who had attacked Sheltier, but they did not appear. And after a heart-wrenching final battle against the Guardian Cocytus, the Lizardmen were finally allowed to submit to Ainz. The story then continues in the Kingdom of Riestais, where Sebastian, the Butler of Steel, together with Solution Epsilon, another battlemate, was still on a mission, the same mission he started together with Sheltier Bloodfallen, and therefore Ainz feared that Sebas might be the next target. Indeed, the Butler used an extremely powerful scroll, one that Ainz had been unable to reproduce ever since, to heal an insignificant peasant girl with a very troubled past, who was left for dead. And this led him to clash with the Eight Fingers, an incredibly powerful criminal organization. And this caused Solution to believe that Sebastian had already betrayed Nazarick. However, when Sebas passed a loyalty test, which involved supposedly eliminating Tuare, it was clear he had not fallen victim to mind control or any treason. And then in a quiet moment, the Eight Fingers managed to kidnap Tuare, who had just been placed under the personal protection of Ainz Ooal Gown. The outcome was that Demiurge, disguised as the demon emperor Yaldabaoth, subdued the Eight Fingers, raided their warehouses, and further established Momon as a legendary hero who drove out Yaldabaoth by losing to him deliberately. Demiurge also used this time to establish contact with Renna, who was promised eternal life and her pet Climb safety in exchange for betraying her land and her family, turning from a golden princess into a demon over the course of the further story. In the 7th volume, we meet the adventurer team Foresight, who along with other adventurers were hired to explore a mysterious tomb, a venture that would be their downfall, as they were either eliminated or worse, taken captive. And the fan favorite Arche partially survived, as in her voice was given to Entoma, since Entoma had lost her own voice producing Lipbug in a fight against Evil Eye and the team of Blue Roses, who narrowly survived the following confrontation with Yaldabaoth. Following this, Ainz Ooal Gown used the invasion by these forces from the Empire as leverage to compel Emperor Jerknif to visit the Great Tomb and apologize. Ainz then formed an alliance with him, which he saw as an honest friendship treaty between the two nations. In return, Jerknif offered to capture the fortress city of Ivantel, if Ainz would unleash his strongest magic. And this led to the formation of the Sorcerer Kingdom. And Jerknif with this move wanted to demonstrate to everybody Nazarick's enormous power, so that the world would unite everyone against the Great Tomb. And Nazarick was interested in proving its might as well, especially since the court mage Fluda Paradane had already switched sides, betraying his empire to become Ainz Ooal Gown's apprentice. And their goal was to simply show everybody how overwhelmingly powerful the Great Tomb was, and that there was no hope of victory. And the subsequent battle between the Kingdom of Riestais and the Empire of Barut ended in a disaster for both sides. The kingdom lost 2/3 of its army, and the Empire's forces also suffered losses, trampling each other in a panic as they fled from the summoned Dark Young. After Ainz did an epic face reveal, and is now known as an undead overlord by all. Also Ainz now had his kingdom, while the world feared him and his realm. Afterwards, Ainz wanted to strengthen the economy of the Sorcerer Kingdom, named after a suggestion by Cocytus. As everyone was afraid to travel there, and many had fled, the economy was in shambles. And the Adventurer Guild, now under the state control, was also only a shadow of its former self. So Ainz, still having ties and at least some superficial feelings for it, because he spent time there as Momon, wanted to rebuild it. And in his new utopian state, everyone would prosper, and adventurers would receive a fair pay, a good work-life balance, and life insurance, meaning they would be resurrected by Ainz if they fell. Ainz then traveled incognito to the Empire, which went against all diplomatic protocols for a king, to defeat the champion in the Imperial Arena in Aventar, and then returned to recruit the adventurers there. Meanwhile, Emperor Gazef secretly invited representatives from Slayn to his own lodge to meet with them in the Imperial Arena. Gazef then misinterpreted the subsequent confrontation, which Ainz didn't even notice, as a brilliant chess move, as it made him appear a traitor in the eyes of Slayn, the most powerful human state, and its priests, and in the eyes of the very own priests of the Empire, and Gazef then ultimately submitted himself and his very own realm to Ainz Ooal Gown, though Ainz himself didn't quite understand what happened here. The story then continues with a visit to the Dwarf Kingdom, where Ainz saved the dwarves from an invasion by the Quagoa, more like humans, and between all of this, Enfiria Baliar, now living in Karn village, also managed to unite the potions of the old with the new world. Then the story continues with a visit to the Dwarven Kingdom, where Ainz saved the dwarves from an invasion by the Quagoa, more like humanoids, and subdued the frost dragons under Olarsir Dark Halilial's command, eliminating the head of this dragon family and one of its sons. And his reward was an indebted Dwarven Kingdom and Dwarven Smiths, the last ones who still mastered the fading out of runecraft. Using this very interesting kind of magic, which was entirely different from the tier-based magic of Yggdrasil Online, they could forge weapons and armor that didn't exist back in Yggdrasil. And this not only appealed to his collector's instinct, but also to his business sense, because Ainz was once a salaryman in a large corporation in the semi-dying world of 2138, and he wanted to revive the lost art, bring it to his own realm, and strengthen foreign trade by then exporting runecraft weapons and items. The economy and social life in the Sorcerer Kingdom by this point had also, by the way, not only recovered, but were actually thriving. And thanks to the integration of the Empire, the good relationships with the Dwarven Kingdom, and renewed trade with the Kingdom of Rhea's Ties, because Albedo now controlled the Eight Fingers and forced them to trade with Ainz Ooal Gown's realm on favorable terms, came all together. And even the internally fractured Kingdom of Rhea's Ties as a whole could not forgo relations with the powerful Sorcerer Kingdom, despite the recent losses, and it was also willing to welcome the Prime Minister of the Sorcerer Kingdom, Albedo, who, in secret, was planning to take over Rhea's Ties, and already had a significant influence on politics there. Meanwhile, the theocracy of Slayn was shaken by the appearance of so many powerful beings. However, they were aware that roughly every 100 years, seemingly powerful new entities would appear, much like their own gods, the 6 players who had founded Slayn 600 years ago before Ainz Ooal Gown, and saved humanity from certain extinction did. They suspected that Ainz Ooal Gown was connected to Momon, who was now played by Pandor's actor, his personal NPC and a very high-ranking doppelganger, but not the only one in the Grey Tomb. But they didn't realize that even Jaldabaoth was another ally of Ainz Ooal Gown as well. Now, Demiurge, in his role as the Demon Emperor Jaldabaoth, stood before the wards of the Holy Kingdom, another nation, ready to lead an army of demons and demi-humans against it. Something Demiurge had been planning for a long time. And Ainz was also very aware of how much work had gone into these intense planning phases, and was therefore quite anxious, as he did not want to disappoint Demiurge, who invested so much time and effort into his personal project. And one thing must be mentioned at the end of it. Ainz is not merely a human soul in the body of an undead. His overlord body also affects his mind and his very sense of self. Ainz now can hardly feel compassion, joy, sorrow, or anger, and is therefore indifferent to the suffering of all beings, except for his very own people. So this is a rough summary of the entire storyline of Overlord. Up to the Holy Kingdom movie, Jaldabaoth. The name alone was enough to instill fear and terror in the hearts of the population at the western edge of the nameless continent. The mere existence of this demonic monarch was an existential threat to numerous nations. Yet at the same time, it was nothing more than an illusion crafted by the great tomb of Nazarick. So the question arises, why? What were Demiurge's reason for spreading fear and terror as Jaldabaoth? And as always, my explanation will be a longer one to fully unravel all of this. And let's start with the conception of this very persona, of Demiurge's alter ego, because initially, Nazarick, meaning the Grey Tomb, was completely in the dark about the strength and the mere characteristics and the power levels of this brave new world. Ainz Ooal Gown, for instance, had no idea how powerful the supposed Knights of Beirut actually were, who had attacked the village of Karen. In other words, from his very own perspective, extreme caution was required, and he also had an exit strategy if his grasp heart attack would have failed. And again, we are talking about a 9th tier spell here. And throughout the story, Ainz has repeatedly shown his aversion to engaging in battles where he lacks sufficient information. And because of this, Ainz Ooal Gown initially acted with extreme discretion, hiding his entire Grey Tomb from the eyes of the world. And even before the first contact with other forces actually happened, he instructed Mare to create several hills to conceal the Grey Tomb within a hollowed-out hill. And he also dispatched reconnaissance teams such as Sheltier, Sebas and Solution to gather information. And naturally Ainz himself adopted the role of Momon the Adventurer to obtain further insight about the world alongside Naber Gamma. It was during this time that Demiurge's alter ego, the Demon Emperor Jaldabaoth, was also conceived. And this character was initially designed to target the Holy Kingdom, specifically serving as its great nemesis and antagonist, a fearsome and malevolent figure, intent on corrupting and plunging its people into utter misery. And disguised as this demon emperor, Jaldabaoth could operate in the outside world without jeopardizing Nazarick's secrecy or causing any diplomatic complications down the line. Because after all, it would have been highly suspicious if Jaldabaoth of all people, the demon emperor, suddenly appeared in Nazarick's Grey Tomb as a servant of Ainz Ooal Gown, in front of Jerknif when he visited. So to maintain this facade, Demiurge adopted his frog demon form as his basically main body that he presents to the outside world in diplomatic matters, to further obscure his true identity. And the persona of Jaldabaoth was revealed to the world earlier than initially planned, during the punishment of the 8 Fingers for abducting Tuare. And this public debut established Demiurge's alter ego as a significant threat and enemy. At the same time, it set up Jaldabaoth as the nemesis of Momon the Adventurer, who became a legendary hero of humanity by standing against and triumphing over this grave menace. In other words, despite Jaldabaoth's defeat, this early revelation cemented him in the public eyes as a formidable threat, and his powerful out-of-nowhere appearance, alongside the appearance of the demon battlemates, underscored this immense danger that he posed. And remember, it took Evil Eye and 2 of her teammates to defeat just one of these mates. And Evil Eye, as the Theocracy of Slain knows, is a former member of the 13 Heroes, and powerful enough to inflict tremendous damage if she wanted to basically any civilization. And she alone is a serious threat to the Black Scripture and its elite members, except for the Godkin leading them, and of course for Zeshi. In other words, the existence of 4 additional mates, given that Nab at that time was Momon's companion and presented that way to the wider public, was a shock to basically any major nation, especially to Slain, who saw the incident as linked to the emergence of powerful beings that occur roughly every 100 years. And this event also made the appearance of Jaldabaoth at the borders of the Holy Kingdom even more ominous and threatening. So much for the persona of Jaldabaoth, and now let's address the question of why Jaldabaoth is no longer Jaldabaoth, but has instead been replaced by a servant of his. And the reason here is relatively straightforward. Demiurge is a busy demon who doesn't always have the time to personally handle the daily intricacies of a campaign while assuming his alter ego and acting like it. And he is after all the de facto Minister of Defense for the Great Tomb of Nazarick, as well as an essential strategist and advisor to Ainz Ooal Gown. And therefore Demiurge needed a stand-in, which he accomplished by using a summon. Demiurge was capable of summoning an evil Lord of Wrath and deploying it in battle, and that's exactly what he did. The evil Lord of Wrath we see here is merely a summoning created by Demiurge, which is also why this evil Lord looks different from the one within the Great Tomb of Nazarick. So in short, they are not the same being. A point worth noting as background information because, again, the lives of actual members of the Great Tomb were not risked here. And moreover, the evil Lord served another purpose. Like so many other actions taken by the Great Tomb, it was used as bait to lure out the enemies who had apparently attacked Sheltier Bloodfallen. And for this very reason alone, it made total sense to offer someone as bait who could be sacrificed without a significant loss. And despite being a mere summoning, the evil Lord was still a sentient and independent entity. Like most demons, he also was rather sadistic and cruel by nature, but he also took immense pleasure in his specific role. On one hand, he delighted in demonstrating to people like Remedios Custodio, those who were self-righteous or believed themselves to be just, that all of their strength, training and supposed power, which they wielded to fight evil, were utterly insignificant compared to his own might. On the other hand, he found it tedious and boring to eliminate thousands of enemies and leave the remaining weaklings in a state of terror, already paralyzed by fear and despair before the battle even started. In essence, the battle was over before it had even begun. There was no resistance to break, there was nothing to disprove, no worldview to shatter, because he was already feared and despised and this great threat, and not just another threat to overcome in the minds of most people. So again, what he enjoyed most was shattering the egos and the self-images of righteous heroes like Remedios, or if he had fought him, Climb. He sought to destroy their identities, rooted in being heroes, and the related idea that they were somehow superior, morally and on a physical level. And simultaneously he dismantled their belief that, in the face of evil, they could actually make a difference and bring about change through sheer determination, strength, and courage. And this, in some ways, is a beautiful metaphor for Overlord as an entire series. If people like Philip didn't overestimate themselves, if the Eight Fingers were terrified of Ainz and Nazarick from the start, or if Jerknif immediately surrendered, then Overlord's story would only be half as engaging as it is. The Great Tomb of Nazarick possesses an incredible military force, but it has only mobilized this power a very limited amount of times. For example, during the display of power against the Lizardmen, all of the Floor Guardians, including Victim and Gargantua, were present, along with the Old Guardians of Nazarick, the Old Guardas, a skeletal army with magical weapons, which were then repurposed into a staircase. And this display wasn't merely meant to demonstrate Nazarick's strength to the Lizardmen, but also to provoke an attack from the suspected players who, as Nazarick and Ainz believed, might have been responsible for mind-controlling Sheltier Bloodfallen. However, even then, the forces shown, comprising the Floor Guardians, Ainz, and the Old Guardas of Nazarick, were only a fraction of the Great Tomb's full strength. The main military force remained stationed on the 8th floor of Nazarick, a place so dangerous that Albedo, on Ainz' order, has isolated it from the rest of the guild. And even Rubedo, the strongest entity in the Great Tomb, who also resides on the 8th floor, was also not deployed, and other high-level units, such as the Overlords of Wrath and of Greed and so on and so forth, the Overlords guarding Nazarick's library, Ashurbanipal, numerous summons, and countless other powerful beings like the Magma Slime Gurren also remained untouched and undeployed. In other words, even this massive display of strength was just a fraction of Nazarick's true total military power. So Ainz Ooal Gown could have mustered far more forces to impress the Lizardmen or to intimidate and potentially attack other players, after they tried something funny again with their Floor Guardians. And lastly, Ainz Ooal Gown can also summon an enormous number of skeletons and undead, and these alone would have been sufficient to deal with the Lizardmen. A few Death Knights, a Death Warrior here and there, or Elder Liches would have been enough to annihilate the Lizardmen if they all attacked combinedly. And legendary mages like Fluda Paradane and his numerous apprentices were only able to defeat a single Death Knight through a relentless aerial bombardment of fireball spells from hundreds of meters away. In other words, even Nazarick's very disposable units would pose a problem for any nation. Additionally, the 3 Soul Eaters which once annihilated the Beastman city and claimed the lives of over 100,000 men are also at Nazarick's disposal, as illustrated on the cover of the 9th volume, and in greater numbers at that. So in summary, Nazarick is currently, unless other elite guilds have also made it to the New World, the dominant military power in this very dimension. And even though Demiurge's, or rather Jaldabaoth's army, is significantly weaker than Nazarick's full military power, it is still incredibly formidable. Jaldabaoth not only commanded the demi-humans and heteromorphic warriors from the Abelian Hills, but also had his own troops, consisting of demons and other beings he could summon, in addition to his personal combat prowess and strength on his disposal, which he could rely on to ensure victory in many critical battles. And at the beginning of this event, depicted in the movies, or the corresponding books, Volume 12 and Volume 13, Demiurge's army also included powerful leaders, such as Buzer and the 3 other tribal chiefs whom you see here, preparing for battle against Remedios Custodio. And beyond these, there were countless other strong enemies, such as those who guarded the hostages from the individual tribes or were tasked with critical management functions. For instance, the demon fought by Shizu and Neia Baraya was an exceptionally strong entity, but limited itself to a mere demonstration fight, a mock battle if you will, against Shizu and Neia, and Shizu is a level 46 Pleiades battlemate with backup. Furthermore, it is also essentially to consider the broader context of the situation. The forces of the Demon Emperor had completely overtaken the northern region of the Holy Kingdom. They had destroyed the kingdom's primary military strength in the Battle of the Capital, Hobruns, including the Holy Queen Kalka Besaris and Kilat Custodio, Remedios' magically gifted sister, who served as the Queen's advisor and strategist. Eliminating these 2 formidable casters and leaders alone was a massive blow to the entire nation. In addition to this, the paladins were significantly diminished and decimated, and the forces at the wall were also overwhelmed during Demiurge's initial strike. And the civilian population, which again was usually subject to conscription and had received some military training and therefore could potentially resist, was interned in camps. And their labor, and not only their labor, in fact their entire body, was also ruthlessly exploited, thus leaving the populace under complete control and only capable of very sporadic and uncoordinated resistance at the very best. And to make matters even worse, the surviving paladins fled the Holy Kingdom, temporarily depriving the northern resistance of its remaining powerful military resources, because even though Remedios Custodio is as intelligent as half a brick and has the same foresight as a blind mole in dense fog, was extraordinarily strong by the standards of the New World, and her temporary loss at that, was significant, because the paladins themselves were a formidable force, capable of summoning angels to decisively eliminate smaller enemy groups without risking their own casualties. and therefore a temporary absence was very keenly felt, because the paladins themselves were also a formidable force, capable of summoning angels to decisively eliminate smaller enemy groups without risking their own. In other words, while Remedios and Neia with the other paladins traveled from nation to nation to seek an army for reinforcement, the northern region of the kingdom was utterly devastated and defenseless. It was only through Neia's effort, alongside Shizo, that parts of Yaldabaoth's forces began to defect later, driven by the rescued hostages. So at this point in the timeline, the discipline held up, although some leaders occasionally pursued their own objectives, but ultimately the victory over the northern region of the kingdom was near total. But despite these later and from outside induced fractures, at the time where the Paladin Order was away to gather support and reinforcement, the kingdom, at least its northern part, was completely occupied and unable to resist, and the victory was nearly complete and total. And with all of that said, there were in fact two main reasons why Demiurge decided not to occupy the southern part of the Holy Kingdom as well, and the first reason is a complete pretext. Allegedly, the kingdom's fleet was still able to keep Yaldabaoth's forces at bay, something Yaldabaoth himself could have changed at any time if he truly wanted to, because he clearly is stronger than a few ships. But instead, this served as an excuse to create the illusion that Yaldabaoth was not that invincible and had limits to his power. It was meant to convince the world, and particularly the southern region, that the Demon Emperor's strength had its boundaries. At least for now, until Yaldabaoth's true strength was revealed in the final battle to increase the shock and awe value. In reality, the entire operation, including the occupation of the north and the perceived invulnerability of the south, was a ploy to deepen the already significant divide between the northern and southern region of the kingdom, and this would further exacerbate tensions and unrest after Yaldabaoth was ultimately defeated by Ainz Ooal Gown. The south of the kingdom had never been happy with the rule of Queen Kalka Besaris, and they were displeased that Caspon Besaris, Kalka's elder brother, renounced his claim to the throne, which allowed Kalka to take power. So the southern nobles resisted her rule at every single turn and opportunity. And economically, the southern region remained intact, while the north suffered greatly under Yaldabaoth's occupation, creating a stark economic disparity. And life under Yaldabaoth's rule in the north was an entirely different experience from the normal existence under the southern aristocracy. And this stark contrast led to vastly different perspectives on the war between the inhabitants of the two regions. In other words, every aspect of this plan was designed to drive the division within the kingdom even deeper. To further this goal, Demiurge, by the end of Volume 13, also mentioned that the double caste bond, because the real caste bond had been long eliminated, should make poor governing decisions to ultimately escalate the tensions even further. And all of this served to prepare Neia as a new figure of light and salvation for the people of the Holy Kingdom, and set the stage for a civil war, or overtaking of the government by the newly formed Order of Neia. And this conflict would ensure the Holy Kingdom's complete subjugation and loyalty to Nazarick. And Nazarick, through grain shipments, was already assisting the kingdom and securing its dependence. And ultimately, in a final act, the Holy Kingdom would formally join an alliance or pact under Ainz leadership and sign various treaties of friendship or even vassalization, similar to what already happened to the Barut Empire in the future. And again, this time it won't take a misunderstanding of Emperor Jerknif of Ainz's appearance in the imperial capital of Aventar for this to happen. All it would take was time. And it must be said that Demiurge isn't a tyrant per se, not always at least. Anyway, right from the beginning of the first volume of Overlord, we get a good look at his character. Yes, Demiurge has a karma rating of -500 and is undoubtedly evil, but he also has allies, friends and acquaintances whom he holds in good regards. He is a three-dimensional character, and not just a caricature of a villain or a cruel tyrant, and both the anime and the light novel paint a nuanced picture of the man with the diamond eyes. And at the very beginning of the story, when the floor guardians arrived one by one on the amphitheater on the 6th and largest floor of Nazarick's great tomb, Shelty and Albedo argued over Ainz Ooal Gown's favor. And Mara asked why marriage was so important, and for a brief moment, Demiurge considered explaining to Mara everything that goes into having children in rather explicit details. And I believe that would be one of the only educational talks even more awkward and brutal than the one between Tywin Lannister and his grandson Tommen, the king that tried to land the best ideas. But of course Demiurge dismissed this cruel thought immediately, simply to protect the boy. And when it comes to friendship, Demiurge isn't a cynical and cruel tyrant either, but someone who indeed maintains his relationships, especially with Cocytus, one of the most honorable warriors in Nazarick's Grey Tomb, and someone who wanted to spare the Lizardmen for their courage, spirit, honor, and willingness to sacrifice themselves in battle to protect that what was dear to them. Because originally, Ainz Ooal Gown intended to eliminate the Lizardmen after conquering them, so their bodies could join the undead army of the Grey Tomb. However, until just a few hours ago, Cocytus still saw himself as merely a tool of Nazarick's 41 supreme beings, the players of the Grey Tomb, rather than as a thinking, independent being, and this made it difficult for him to fully express his thoughts, wishes, feelings, and formulate a request in a way that would benefit both himself and Nazarick. And that's when Demiurge stepped in to help him out, suggesting that the Lizardmen could be used as a test run of how Nazarick, which would soon be ruling over vast territories, could perform in governing small and isolated tribe villages. It is a way to get some practice in ruling and lording over others. And therefore Demiurge also proposed that Cocytus be assigned this responsibility. And in doing so, Demiurge really saved Cocytus's frosty behind, at least from the perspective of the other NPCs, because Ainz had essentially been asked for a favor by a floor guardian who had just failed his mission. Normally, this would offend the other NPCs, as it would be seen as disrespectful towards the Overlord. And Demiurge also enjoys going out for drinks with Cocytus, sometimes at the same bar where Shelty once tried to drown her sorrows, unsuccessfully due to her immunity to poison. And this always reminds me of that one scene from SpongeBob SquarePants from the movie at the Goofy Goobers. And Demiurge also respects the human woman Renna, whom he, like Albedo, viewed as a heteromorph in spirit. He admired her ruthlessness, which to an outsider or a human from the New World is very, very, very much unusual. But Demiurge is indeed malicious to the core, especially towards those who are weak and defenseless, and under his control. And this is the main reason Demiurge treats his own allies so brutally. He takes sheer delight in the suffering and agony of others. For example, Demiurge loved shearing the sheep at the Happy Farm and pulling their non-existent wool over their ears. Much like Tywin Lannister, he took genuine pleasure in this kind of work, although his was not just a gutting and not done on unalived animals. And by the way, I still think it's a shame that Dan and Dave cut out the scene where Tywin catches fish, as that, along with the gutting of the stag, was a nice metaphor for what he would later do to his enemies. Just again a side note on Game of Thrones. And another point I want to highlight is that, besides enjoying the suffering of others, Demiurge is very aware that the formerly scattered, hostile, and war-torn battle-hardened demi-human and heteromorphic tribes of the Abelian Hills would rebel the moment they sensed any weakness. That's why Demiurge quickly implemented very harsh punishments. For instance, one of the leaders who reported a little too late was partially skinned and flayed in front of the entire army to show everyone that even the smallest, seemingly acceptable infractions would lead to severe consequences. Consequences that naturally no one wanted to face, and by punishing even the slightest offenses immediately, larger rebellions are nipped in the bud, thus maintaining discipline in the army. If even the strongest leaders among Demiurge's troops are punished brutally, then everyone in the army understands that they are no match for Demiurge, or rather Yaldabaoth, the Demon Emperor, and his many demonic troops that act as enforcers. A third reason for Demiurge's cruelty was also to incite disgust, contempt, and hatred towards himself, because Demiurge knows very well how to use brutality and tyranny to prevent anyone from even considering revolting against him. But, ironically, that wasn't the goal. Demiurge, in his role as the Demon Emperor Yaldabaoth, was meant to be defeated eventually. And through his cruel behavior and poorly thought-out hostage tactics, he ensured that the demi-humans and heteromorphic troops he had subjugated would betray him, switch sides, and had an opportunity to do so. And therefore, after a victorious battle, Ainz Ooal Gown retreated to the Iberian Hills, of course under the pretense of having been defeated and being basically alive. And this allowed him to lead a rebellion in the heart of Yaldabaoth's empire, ultimately setting the stage for a decisive battle in which he could save the defected troops and the Holy Kingdom's own forces from Yaldabaoth's wrath, defeating him in a spectacular showdown, at least from the perspective of the other participants of the battle. And this allowed Ainz to appear as the savior at the very last minute. In other words, Demiurge, in his role as Yaldabaoth, acted with conscious cruelty to foster disgust and disdain towards himself, to make the rebellion against him more possible and believable and feel more natural. And now it's your turn. What's your opinion on Demiurge and his, let's say, interesting social behavior? Let me know it down in the comments. And with that said, please check out my German channel, my fantasy channel, and if you don't want to listen to my voice or accent, but are still very interested in the things I have to say, I have made an AI channel, narrated by almost a woman, where I use AI voiceovers for my videos. And the channels are all linked down in the video description. Also, please check out my Patreon if you want to support me beyond just leaving a like or sub. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching, thanks to my Patreons for supporting this channel, and special thanks to Remedios Custodius, the Grandmaster of the Paladin Order of the Holy Kingdom, and thanks to her enormous strength, she is also ranked among the heroes, the Realm of Heroes to be precise, because she is over level 30, making her one of the strongest human characters in the new world of Overlord. But before we dive in, I want to clarify that I will be explaining her strength and her weaknesses beyond all of this by comparing her to Gazef Stronoff, the strongest human in the Kingdom of Ties, so that we can clearly see the difference between the two. And this isn't meant to be a pure versus video between Gazef and between Remedios, but it is meant to serve as an explanation and exploration of the particular strengths and weaknesses of Remedios. So let's get started. First and foremost, Remedios, in contrast to Gazef, is not purely a melee build. As the leader of the Paladin Order, she is a hybrid build, a mix of a battle-oriented priest, meaning she fights with holy magic, and a traditional melee-based knight, who specialized in close combat, much like Gazef Stronoff. Thus, she would be somewhat closer to Robert Dyke than to a pure close combat fighter like Brain Anglaus or Gazef Stronoff. However, in direct comparison, Gazef Stronoff would win against Remedios Custodio when it comes to just raw strength and pure swordsmanship. And this is also perhaps worth mentioning, her sword. The holy sword Zafarlesia would be inferior to the Kingdom of Ties' sword Razor Edge, not only because Razor Edge is a powerful sword, but also because it can even injure Ainz Ooal Gown himself. And Ainz fears, or at least assumes, that Razor Edge could even cut or destroy world items. Furthermore, Razor Edge contains a hidden, as of yet unseen power that even Gazef does not know about, and which was only discovered by Ainz Ooal Gown after analyzing this sword. And on the other hand, while Zafarlesia is much stronger against opponents with negative karma, like someone such as Naber al-Gamma or Lupus Regina Beta, who would suffer considerable damage because of this sword, and its special attack. But this attack is nearly useless against people with neutral or even positive karma. In other words, Gazef Stronoff is in this regard a bad matchup for her. But the weakness compared to Gazef extends even further when considering the armor of both, because Gazef Stronoff, equipped with the treasures of the kingdom, is like kind of a perpetual motion machine. The equipment heals him and even prevents him from tiring. In other words, he doesn't need to sleep and can, much like an undead, fight 24 hours a day continuously and regenerate health and never tire. This means that even serious injuries like broken bones can be healed within a few minutes. Remedios, on the other hand, requires external support and help for many of these effects. Even in her best armor, she's not able to fight indefinitely or recover from severe injuries just on her own perpetually. But here's the thing. Neither Remedios nor Gazef Stronoff would operate alone and on their own in larger battles. For instance, during the siege of the city of Lloyds by the demi-humans of the army of Yaldabaoth, Remedios held the gate by positioning herself in the narrow passage and simply was eliminating everything that came too close to her or her sword, always certain that the magic course behind her would heal any negative status effects, injuries, and restore her stamina. Additionally, many of the paladins also know healing magic, so the healers can simply be taken out by close combat units. And not only are they good close combatant fighters, but they can naturally heal themselves as well, which forces the enemy to land a decisive strike and quickly take out all of the healer paladins, because otherwise they risk not only being defeated, but also having fought for nothing, as all the injuries would be healed within a few minutes. And this way, Remedios could remain effective in battle almost indefinitely, without having to worry about her own mana running out. And this would be more difficult for Gazef, because Riestais doesn't have a systematic training of casters, neither in holy magic to a paladin order, nor in arcane magic like Fluder Paradine does in the Empire, within his own academy. And this is something that would put Gazef at a disadvantage on the battlefield, when both the armies of the kingdom and of the Holy Kingdom would meet, which he would then have to compensate for with his equipment. Additionally, Remedios wouldn't just be healed, but would also be endlessly buffed by her supporters behind her. In other words, her combat strength would be greatly increased, and was extremely increased, even without using any of her own skills when she defended the Gate of Lloyds. However, Remedios' speciality as Grandmaster of the Paladin Order is not combat against anybody or against any human or humanoid opponent, but rather against evil itself. And this is where Remedios would truly shine, because Remedios Custodio, like all the other paladins, also masters the martial art known as Holy Strike, which focuses channeled holy energy that explodes upon contact with the target and causes immense holy-based damage, especially to undead enemies. And this is not only because skeletons and other undead are weak against holy magic, but also because Holy Strike deals bonus damage against any creature with negative karma, meaning it would be thrice as effective against any undead because of these two additional effects. And additionally, as an evil slayer, Remedios has the ability to further amplify holy magic and holy effects, even those aimed at creatures with negative karma already. In other words, in her hands, Zapharlesia becomes even more powerful against evil creatures, and especially against the undead. But it remains mediocre against other opponents. Furthermore, Remedios can also use classical abilities of melee-based fighters, like Flow Acceleration and Fortress. And Fortress allows Remedios to withstand attacks that would normally knock her aside and greatly increase her defense, as seen with Clementine, who was able to deflect a great sword from Ainz Ooal Gown using nothing more than her stillet. so it shows how useful this ability is, especially against larger and heavier opponents, like for example massive demi-humans. And the second martial art is flow acceleration, which classically increases one's own strength by increasing one's own speed and agility, but it also improves upon one's own reflexes and not just speed alone. So it is also an unconscious thing as well. However, it causes enormous mental exhaustion and fatigue due to the rapid processing of stimuli in the brain, as the brain has to handle such high input all at once, which represents a huge strain on it. So it's almost like overclocking your brain, but not improving the cooling of the processing unit. And for some reason, I imagine a pea-sized brain in Remedios. It's a nice mental image to say the absolute least. But again, this can be healed by the paladins and the magic casters around her. And in the end, unlike Gazef Stronoff, Remedios was also able to do something that he never managed to: ascend to the realm of heroes, meaning to be over level 30, even without the use of any wild magic ring. In other words, in terms of sheer numbers of levels, Remedios is already stronger than Gazef, but she is specialized in fighting evil, not other humans as Gazef or Brain Anglaus are. Another aspect of her strength is that she openly and without hesitation claimed that she could break the iron chains that were meant to bind Chizu Delta from head to toe. In other words, her strength is clearly superhuman, and even unarmed, she could crush skulls and punch holes into stone walls. In other words, she is also physically extremely strong, even without a weapon, but her true strength shines in battles against the undead, where she not only has special abilities that deal enormous damage to the undead as creatures of evil, but she can also imbue her weapons with holy magic, and use holy magic-based skills to further enhance them. And if you add her magic armor, the effects of which are not known yet, Remedios could potentially defeat a Death Knight or a Death Warrior all on her own, as she would deal massive damage, and Sarfalesia would do the rest to bring the undead to the death part of their name. In other words, against undead or enemies with negative karma, Remedios is far stronger than Gazef and could win matchups that Gazef could never hope to win, even in his best days, even with all of his armor and his weapons. However, against combat, against a pure melee build, she is weaker than her level would suggest, and she would stand little chance against Gazef Stronoff and especially against Brain Anglaus, despite having a higher level than Gazef. And with that being said, it is also important to know that Remedios could not fight against her speciality, her enemies against which she is strong, against the undead, during the War of Liberation. Instead, she was forced to ally with one, the undead sorcerer king. While the generally much stronger demi-humans, like from their base stats alone, like Vijar, represented a kind of weakness on her build, which is heavily focused on fighting evil creatures, those demi-humans who have naturally higher base physical stats, and do exactly what Remedios also tries to do, but for them, every level is focused on combat in general, regardless of the opponent, thus making them better fighters per spent level. Moreover, Remedios rarely uses her normal strength creatively or optimally due to her very simple mind. I mean, if all you have is a hammer, every enemy looks like a nail. And with that, we are done for today. Remedios Custodio was never the brightest candle on the cake, and actually not even on the cake. The reason why she is the way she is and acts the way she does is because she has a self-contained worldview that cannot be changed from the outside anymore. And this is in part because of her personality, but also in part because Remedios Custodio, like the overwhelming majority of the population of the Holy Kingdom, adheres to a faith based on the four gods of earth, air, water, and fire. This is in stark contrast to the theocracy of Slain, which is based on a system of 6 gods, And the origin of both religious movements seems to lie with those 6 players who came to the New World 600 years ago and saved humanity from certain death at the very last second, giving them the gift of magic as a way to defend themselves against the monsters of this very world. And the 6 players consisted of 4 human players and 1 elven player, as well as a heteromorphic undead player named Zurshana. And the 4 human players were associated with the elements of air, earth, water and fire, while Zurshana represented death and darkness, and the elven player represented light and life. And due to the fact that these 2 players were not human, almost all nations, except for the theocracy of Slame, who indeed pretends that these 2 were humans to their own citizen, removed these 2 beings from their pantheon over the centuries. So only the 4 human players continued to be worshipped as gods, and no one would know today that they were once players, or what players actually are. This of course has led to many religious conflicts with the theocracy, and Remedios is also firmly entrenched in their belief in the 4 gods. In other words, her religious teachings are set in stone and are not questioned or just interpreted, and Remedios has fared quite well with this worldview. She is a natural talent when it comes to swordsmanship and left the thinking part to her smarter sister, Kilat Custodio. And her strong faith gives her an unwavering will to endure even the greatest hardships and pain to fight for justice. And this is also reflected in her devout loyalty to the Holy Queen Kalka Besaris. And Kalka, due to her status as the Holy Queen, is also a religious authority. Therefore her position, thoughts, and political demands are also of religious significance to Remedios, and it is essential for her to follow Kalka's words and instructions to the letter, and never question them. And this is where the problem lies. The literal following of supposedly divine laws and rulers, who are completely honest and genuinely want the best for everyone, still reaches its limits, when reality doesn't work the way religious scriptures say it should, or in this case, the orders of the Holy Queen. In other words, Remedios' stubbornness stems from her desire to do only what is right, and anyone who does not want to do what is right is either evil or has not understood that everyone simply needs to do the right thing for everything and everyone to be fine. And again, as far as we know, her faith is based on the mistaken assumption that the 6 or rather the 4 players who came to the New World in their in-game avatars were divine beings. But again, Remedios doesn't know that, and she can't question or interrogate her own religious text and scriptures for such things. And of course she wouldn't do such a thing, because this would be blasphemy. So in this sense, for her, any deviation from a religious dogma is also a sin and a step towards evil, so she can't step away from it. And this is exactly why Remedios is so inflexible and rigid in her views, and why she can be essentially checkmated on a mental level. For if her queen orders Remedios to do everything to protect the lives of the weakest members of society, the poor children, and to never endanger their lives, even during a war, then, from both Kalka's and Remedios' perspectives, there's only the best of intentions here, and no ill will. But what if the children are held hostage by the enemy faction, which then demands that all combat operations against them cease? In that case, Remedios cannot fight evil without endangering the children, which again would be evil, and therefore it can't be done. And she cannot save the children, which she has to, without fighting the evil that she can't fight anymore. In other words, due to this logical flaw in her faith, Remedios can essentially crash like a computer in the real world. She could freeze like a computer because of logic errors and let's put it that way, a very limited amount of processing power. And this story, this aspect of Remedios, not only has a pretty clear warning against dogma, but I think it also has a connection to Japanese society, because just as it is customary in Germany to still use fax machines and overhead projectors and to essentially keep technological advancement away from offices and institutions because that's how we've always done it, Japan has a similar problem with its stamps and fax machines as well, which many Japanese companies, offices, and bureaus still suffer from. It's this inflexibility, even if it fails clearly, and the inability of those in power to address this failing that is criticized here in this very metaphor of Remedios. And thus Remedios' character also has a meta level to it, meant to highlight the problems of stubbornness and blind dogma. But it goes even further, because the sad part of this whole story is not only Remedios, but this goes even further, because the sad part, apart from Remedios being in it, of this entire story is that Neia, and this is something that is rarely mentioned in the discussion about Overlord, becomes, over the course of the story and over the course of her experiences, a sort of Remedios Custodio 2.0. Let me explain briefly. When Remedios Custodio and her troops halted their attack on a small town occupied by the enemy, after the enemy threatened to eliminate human children and the rest of the hostages as well, if the previously successful offensive wasn't immediately halted, Remedios, torn between her oath, her faith, her worldview, and her fear of endangering the children, desperately searched for a solution, but she still halted the advance, much to the delight of the enemy. But after ideologically boxing herself into a corner and seeing no way out, she became increasingly enraged, uncontrollable, and more desperate and illogical. And in a similar way, Neia found herself at a similar point during the story. When Ainz Ooal Gown, after a long and grueling battle with the demon Emperor Yaldabaoth, or at least the supposed demon Emperor Yaldabaoth, fell defeated from the sky, apparently gravely wounded, and landed somewhere deep in enemy territory, far away in the hills of Rebellion, which were firmly in Yaldabaoth's hands. Neia was gripped by the same religious panic, the same crisis in her worldview, the same desperation, the same terror, and the same helpless, furious, and irrational anger that Remedios displayed when her own offensive was halted. So even though Remedios Custodio acted very foolishly, irrationally, and narrow-mindedly, and was therefore rightfully ridiculed and despised by the Overlord community, especially because she treated Neia so abysmally, Neia, in that critical moment when Ainz Ooal Gown fell from the sky before her own eyes, the man she admired for solving her problems, apparently have failed. In that very moment, Neia's health had become just as bad as Remedios, with her demands and her screeching. It was like watching Remedios' personality and character flaws mirrored onto her. And I want to emphasize at this point that this escalation happened relatively early on her religious journey, even before she massively converted people and held sermons in public places in the name of Ainz Ooal Gown, whom she now worships as justice. By the time of the events at the end of Season 4, which play out after the events of the Holy Kingdom, when the capital city of Riestais received the declaration of war from the Sorcerer Kingdom, Neia and her signature was among the most important ones on the declaration, because other nations, such as the Empire under Emperor Jerknef, again just a puppet, but also the Dragon Kingdom and the Dwarven Kingdom, supported this declaration of war as well. And for the Holy Kingdom, Neia co-signed this declaration of war in support of Ainz Ooal Gown, which means that she had now way more power and largely converted the Holy Kingdom to her own faith and became such a central religious authority that despite only being a squire just a few months or at least a year prior, and not even a fully fledged paladin, she ascended so much that she was able to sign the documents with her own signature. She became extremely powerful in her own right, under the hidden tutelage of Ainz Ooal Gown's minions. And therefore, she now stands in line with the Regency Council, which represents the Dwarven King in his absentee, with the Queen of an entire nation, the Queen of the Holy Kingdom, Draudilon Riculus, and Emperor Jerknev. Neia therefore has likely deeply entrenched herself even further into this Remedios mindset, and had become solidified in her worldviews. In other words, even though we as the viewer find Neia somewhat more likable than Remedios Custodio, which, to be fair, isn't that hard, because Neia Baraya can, at the very least, somewhat perceive Ainz Ooal Gown's ability and personality from her own perspective and from our perspective, and while she is essentially what Janus and later Fubuki or King are in One Punch Man, the ones who are the only ones to understand how strong Saitama is, Neia, because of this, loses that more objective and rational view of the world that she once had, and drenched herself in religious fervor. In other words, while in most anime, we usually see the protagonist first and what they can do and what they can't do, before we see sort of a dark twin or twist on the entire personality and character of the hero, that is then later introduced to the show, to show what could go wrong. But in Overlord instead, we have someone like Remedios Custodio, to whom Neia has partially already become similar. And that is kind of tragic. And just like Remedios, Neia will now take the words and actions of a player, Ainz, as a divine command and as pure justice, even though we know how often Ainz Ooal Gown is himself uncertain what to do. And with all of that said, now it's your turn. What do you think about Remedios Custodio and how Neia Baraya slowly becomes a miniature version of her? Let me know it down in the comment section. And while you type, I say thank you very much for watching, thanks again to all of my Patreons for supporting this channel, and as usual, special thanks to Ada Daddy Ada, ASK, Bad Guy Ye, Bad Burrito 316, Bezer, Ben C, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Dan Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feral Shivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Lelouch V. Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Lofrazer, Merovec, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, O'Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Cune Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, Diorg Warboss, Rock Ed Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito 27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Zinukai, and Sonagon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.